Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on football. My name is Joe Patrick. I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for 92.9 The Game since 2022, and it's finally time to give our final roster projections. It's the roster projection show, or the prediction show, I guess we could call it, basically, officially. If you're listening to this on Tuesday or later in the week, you may already know, and we'll see kind of where I was right and wrong. But I figure, we've been doing these every week, and it's worth just kind of putting out a final one, even though we did get word of some of the players who were released following the Falcons' final preseason game against the Cowboys, where they lost once again, finishing 0-3 in the preseason, as they seems like they tend to do as of late. The list of those names: Matthew Cindric, Ben DiNucci, Elijah Dodson, Morgan Fox, maybe a surprising one. We'll talk about that in a little bit as we go through some of the positions. Lamar Jackson, another one who was at one point on our roster, I think on the first episode. Caleb Johnson, a linebacker, Nikola Kalinic, Nick Kubitz, Jesse Matthews, Ronnie Perkins, Quincy Skinner Jr., and Josh Thompson is the names of the official players who were released from the Falcons. And we'll get into some of those names as we get into our projection. It is worth noting, by the way, and I wanted to give a shout out to Tori McElhaney from AtlantaFalcons.com, who put this out, kind of clarifying some of the rules around the PUP and the new IR slots. Was I had totally forgotten that they changed the rules on these IRs, which allows you now to carry 2 short-term IRs into the season. Previously, if a player went on IR in training camp, they were done for the year. And I think that this is a good rule by the NFL that allows teams to just keep more of the players they like around without having to basically cut players because other players on your roster got hurt. Kind of feels like you're punishing teams twice for that when it's not anything that was something that's kind of out of their control. So I think a good move and something that will allow the Falcons to keep some players around. So let's get into the projection to kind of go into what we saw last year. Just want to kind of point this out once again. Chris Blair, Kevin King were a couple of guys who were cut on what will be tomorrow, and then we're literally on the roster and playing in the team's first game of the season. Last year was against the Steelers. This year will be against the Tampa Bay Bucks. But just worth noting that players who are cut tomorrow or Tuesday, whenever you're listening to this, they may not have seen the last one. You probably will not have seen the last of at least some of them. Some of them surely are players the Falcons really like. The whole point, though, about making cuts is kind of judging around the league who you think you'll be able to keep or who won't get kind of snapped up by other teams put on their rosters, who you think you can kind of sneak by. Natron Brooks, another one of those names, LaCale London, who are on this roster, who are looking like the Falcons really like them, but they could be victims. We'll see. Carlos Washington Jr., another one. And then worth noting that the team added last year, right after cuts, Elijah Wilkinson, who now has a key role in this team going into the year, it looks like, and Khalid Kareem. And then on the right side, if you want to just pause it, just kind of see, I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but the practice squad composition, the left number is the number of players they had on the practice squad, and the right number is the number of players they had at that position in total going into the season. Or not in total, I'm sorry. That was the number on the right is the amount of players they had on the 53-man roster going into it. So that gives you some sense. And so we can start getting into the roster predictions. First, starting off with the quarterbacks, where we have 3: Michael Penix Jr., Kirk Cousins, and Easton Stick. It's plausible that the team could, in a given year, keep only 2 of these quarterbacks. Having said that, Kirk Cousins is a player that, while I don't think he's ultimately going to be moved, if something were to happen and the Falcons can get great value in return for him in a trade, then I think they would definitely do that. And so therefore you have to, I think, keep another quarterback on this roster who could step in. And I think that if they were to release Easton Stick, it's just a chance that if they were to lose him, then you really don't have another quarterback around who would know your system and be able to step in a pinch if needed. So I think they'll play it safe here and keep 3 quarterbacks. I did the number here. This should be 2 running backs. So this was actually the last change that I made to this team, which was to I just took Nathan Carter out of the running backs. I wouldn't be surprised if they keep 3 running backs. In fact, that's the reason why we'll say they keep 3. I just could not decide between these 3. And I think that if all things were equal, if all players are healthy, I think that player is Carlos Washington Jr. pretty comfortably. But given the fact that he's missed time, I think it's just really, really tough to determine. And I would say, again, if Washington is out of the picture because of his injury, then I would give the edge to Carter over Corbin. I do think that they will keep three. So maybe I'm being cowardly. Let's move Carlos Washington Jr. over into this three that they keep. I think that that's the way that it will shake out. At wide receiver, again, this is going to probably be controversial. I should have taken these little arrows out, which was left in from last week, trying to get this done in a hurry, to be perfectly honest. Wide receivers, got them keeping 6 as of this point. Could very well be 7 if they want to only keep the 2 running backs and then add in probably Jamal Agnew would be the 7th as the return man. But I think that there are just enough other return options on this team that I just don't see Agnew as like necessary as maybe some others. And clearly the team has an affinity for him. Raheem Morris talks him up quite a bit, but he just hasn't played much at all this preseason, even in practice. Like, obviously we're not seeing him in some of the games, but he has missed a lot of practice. And I have not seen him rotate in at all, basically, with the offense. So just to give you some perspective on how little they kind of use him in that regard. So, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod, Kaderil Hodge, those are all locks. And then you've got Casey Washington and David Sills also making the team. I should mention, and it goes back to what we had on one of those earlier slides, like if Chris Blair's cut, I think he's up. And we'll talk more about some of the players who I think would be not only practice squad targets, but players who could potentially, we could see them being put on the practice squad and then playing in the team's first game of the season. Chris Blair is among those players, and particularly at this wide receiver position, because Darnell Mooney has not played with this team since the first practice of training camp when he got hurt, and we have no idea what his status is heading into week 1. The team has been very coy about revealing anything along those lines, and I would say, like, at this point, considering that it is so up in the air, I think to say he's questionable for week 1 is maybe even optimistic at this point. Potentially I'm sure we will get definitely more information by this time next week when they have to put out an injury report to start the week. But I'm sure he'll be listed as questionable there because it does sound like he is week to week with his shoulder injury. But his status is very much up in the air. Ray McLeod as well. I mean, Ray McLeod left the last practice that media was at. It got overshadowed by the fact that Caleb McGarry suffered a serious injury and is going to miss a significant amount of time, according to Raheem Morris after the Cowboys game. But Ray McLeod left that practice right at the beginning with what looked to be a hamstring. He pulled up lame after some routes on air and was getting his hamstring stretched by a trainer afterwards. And so you never know the severity of those things. Maybe it was something very slight that he can play through, but you just never know. So we don't know the status of Ray at this time. And Kaderil Hodge didn't practice last week either. And either of the 2 practices that media was at on Monday and Wednesday, he was out with a vague tightness, is the way that Raheem Morris referred to it. So I think we can assume if it's tightness, whatever's tight is probably not some serious injury, and that he will be able to play week 1 against the Bucs, but still don't like the fact that he was not practicing. And then Casey Washington obviously has stepped up in Darnell Mooney's absence. He's basically taking over that X role, and David Sills has basically won the backup Z role, which is the backup to Drake London in this offense. So I think you have natural backups there for Mooney and London in Washington and Sills, and you hope that Hodge is, or either McLeod and or Hodge is able to play. They're kind of the 2 Fs. So that's basically the 3 receiving roles and 3 backups for them in those roles. But again, I would expect Chris Blair to be signed to the practice squad and potentially even activated for week 1. Potentially the same for Jamal Agnew, and Nick Nash has looked good. I think Dylan Drummond is also a practice squad potential type of guy, but he was around all of last year. And so I do wonder at what point the team decides that, we've seen enough of the development to the point where we need to kind of pivot towards younger players or just different players at this point. And Nick Nash certainly would be one of those types of guys. Moving on to the tight ends, Kyle Pitts, Charlie Warner, Tegan Catoriano. Nothing has changed here. I should say Nikola Kalinic, I have him in contention. He was one of the cuts that we mentioned off the top. Interesting that he was cut and not Joshua Simon. So Simon is still, not that I expect Simon to make the team whatsoever, but would suggest that Simon is maybe more of a practice squad target than Kalinic. And that makes sense. Simon is a UDFA. out of South Carolina. So will be interesting to see that. Felipe Franks could very well make this team if they want to try to make room for him. I would say, we all know that he's a special teams guy, and that's why he would make the team is for special teams. But I would say that he's actually been making plays. Like, he has hands, he can catch the ball, he can do some of those things. He's just a versatile piece, a very versatile piece. If you want to consider him even his quarterback days. I've always thought that Franks could be like a good tush push type, like designated quarterback, if that's something you wanted to do, just because he has the big frame. But we have not seen the team practice that at all. Though I'm sure if that is something they were planning on, they would probably be doing it in secret. But yeah, anyway, just a thought there. Now, this is where it gets interesting, going to the offensive line. So you will notice I have designated a couple players as IR. This refers to go back to what Tori McElhaney had tweeted earlier, these short-term IR spots that basically you can place players on the short-term IR without them counting against the offensive line. So you'll see we actually have 10 offensive linemen here, and that is because it does not count Caleb McGarry and Storm Norton. Now, the team could open up even more space for themselves. If they do decide McGarry's injury is season ending, they could just place him on IR before cuts. The long-term IR, basically open up another short-term IR spot for themselves if there's another player that would fit that criteria, like maybe a Jamal Agnew or a Ray McLeod or a Darnell Mooney or any of these players, and obviously be without that player for the first 4 games, but open themselves up another spot to keep a player on this 53-man roster without having to expose them to waivers. But here we have Jake Matthews, Matthew Bergeron, Ryan Newsel, Chris Lindstrom, and then Elijah Wilkinson I have down here at the bottom. But those are the 5 offensive linemen right now, as I'm sure you're all aware. Elijah Wilkinson slotted in place of Caleb McGarry after McGarry got hurt in that practice and then did not play in the team's final preseason game. So he is the guy right there, or right now. But I would expect this offensive line, even though this is the list of names I'm predicting they keep on Tuesday, I would expect this list to look different by Thursday, basically. Like, I do not think that Jovan Gwynn or Kyle Hinton or Joshua Gray, for that matter, are necessarily safe on this team's 53-man roster. I think they're more like placeholders, basically, at this point. Gwynn, I think you just kind of need to carry because, he's familiar with the offense, can make some of the protection calls, that kind of thing. But he's not shown me that he's basically a starting offensive lineman in the NFL at this point through preseason. Kyle Hinton, he's more reliable depth in the guard spot, but again, he's been on this team as a reserve guard since I started covering the team in 2022. And I would just think that, there would be other options at this point. Now, he's got a quality that is a true strength, which is his strength. Like, the guy is just a mauler at guard. He's not the greatest mover. He doesn't really get to that second level as often and as cleanly as you'd like to see from your guards, especially for a team that specializes in outside zone, which again is why I'm a little bit surprised that he has been able to hold down one of these spots. But it's very clear that Dwayne Ledford, the team's run game coordinator and offensive line coach, really likes him. So Joshua Gray, I'm also just putting in here because he is an intriguing prospect, has played a lot this preseason, and to me has been less of a sore spot than someone like Jack Nelson or Brandon Carter, who we see here in contention. It's worth noting that, it's easier to look obviously bad at tackle than it is at guard. And I could be misreading it because of that, but just the way I see it, again, you don't have a natural backup offensive tackle in any of these players between Hinton, Gwynn, and Gray, but that's mainly because I think the team will be adding at least one tackle, whether it is on a waiver claim or a trade, and we will probably see one of these players in Gray, Gwynn, or Hinton, if those are the 3 that make it on the offensive line, probably let go. Or maybe they could even add more, like a Nelson or a Parker, onto the 53-man roster as well. But I, again, think that they would be basically placeholders for another offensive lineman. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think they need to go overboard and carrying any more than about 8, because there's just other players that are more NFL caliber that are worth keeping on the roster at this point in time. All right, moving on to the defensive line, we have moved Morgan Fox off of the list, so only six defensive line. It's like only six interior defensive linemen. I think Katavius Street, again, is a player who is very much on the borderline of making this roster between him and Taquan Graham. I think the team likes Taquan Graham more. It's really hard to really say what the pecking order is because they rotate so much, and Nate Ollie has said that they want to do that in games. But what I'm talking about is in the practices they rotate to the point where it's like you will have any combination of these six defensive linemen and these six edges that are on the next page. You'll see them all interchanged at any given point. And I do think that they have a pecking order in terms of who's going to be out there once the regular season comes. But when it comes to practice reps and just getting reps on tape, I think that they're very willing to just mix guys in and out to give them the number of looks that they need to get. So David Onyemata, Ruka Roro, Zach Harrison, Brandon Dorless, those four are locked in 100%. And then it's whether they want to, I think that you'll definitely carry at least one more between Graham and Street, or potentially both, which I have them. But I think that this could change. If they only keep five, I would guess that it's Street who is off. But again, he would be a practice squad target, as well as LaCale London and Simeon Barrow. Interesting that Simeon Barrow, kind of like Josh Simon at tight end, UDFA was not cut at this point. And so I think that tells you that they're more in their plans to make the practice squad, unlike Morgan Fox, who was cut. And a little surprising, we talked on the last show about him not impressing basically in training camp and not getting quality reps in the preseason games that would associate himself with making the team. And sure enough, he does not make the team. I thought that there was a chance they might just carry him because you never know if he was carrying a small injury or something that was causing his play to be what it was. And that, he was on guaranteed money, which the team is now on the hook for $3 million in dead cap. Most of that will come this year. So it's not like it really impacts their plans for the future too much, but still just not a great look for the front office to sign a player and devote, salary cap resources to him, at least a little bit, and him for nothing, basically, for not making the team. But tough one for Morgan Fox there. Moving on to edge, I really was torn about this. And when I say torn, I was torn about whether Khalid Kareem is ultimately going to make this team. And I kind of wanted to put D'Angelo Malone on the team for special teams reasons, of course. But I'm just leaving it how it is. And we've been predicting this now for a while. Leonard Floyd, Arnold Ebiketie, Jalen Walker, James Pierce Jr., Khalid Kareem, and Braylon Trice. And ultimately, the reason I think that they keep six on the roster on Tuesday is because you have had some injury concerns with some of these guys. Jalen Walker's had these little, annoying injuries, whether it be whatever it is, these soft tissue injuries. A couple of them have cropped up in this training camp. So I do wonder if they will kind of want to lighten the workload for him, especially for early in the season, and in which case a player like Khalid Kareem, who can play in your base downs, could, provide value. And kind of similar with Braylon Trice, it feels like the team has been slow rolling his reintegration into the team. And I could see Trice being a guy who contributes pretty heavily toward the second half of the season. But I think for right now, I think Khalid Kareem gives you more than Trice, just in terms of a reliable edge piece that can stop the run and give you a little bit in the pass rush. And so for that reason, I am keeping him in the rotation. At linebacker, we've got 5 names here, although only 4 will be, on technically the 53-man roster. As Troy Anderson, I have expected to remain on the physically unable to perform list, the active list, which would mean that he requires a short-term IR stint. It's not technically IR, it's PUP active, basically to start the season, but it has basically the same rules as IR, which means he would miss the first 4 games if he's not activated prior to the 53-man roster coming out, which is what I expect. He has not participated in a practice yet, so it would be pretty surprising if they were to activate him and all of a sudden throw him into practice and expect him to be able to play in the team's week 1 game. That would be the only reason you would activate him and that quickly, is because you would expect him to play, and that just doesn't seem to be on the cards right now. So Caden Ellis and Divine Diablo are going to be the starting linebackers for this team. I put out a tweet last week just saying that I think Divine Diablo is going to be if there's one player on this entire Falcons roster who fans are going to come away with after the first, one or two games thinking, wow, this guy's like a lot better than I thought he was, or like I didn't really know much about this guy, but this guy's impressive. I think Divine Diablo is going to be that guy. He's kind of massive, honestly. Like he's like tall. He looks as big as some of these edges, but like playing at linebacker, it's interesting. Raheem Morris has referred to him as one of the wacky, wild, inflatable car lot guys, just because of like the arms and the length that he has. That linebacker position makes some throwing windows close up quickly for opposing quarterbacks. JD Bertrand is an interesting one because he's frankly had a really poor training camp or a really poor showing in these preseason games. I don't know. I think they're going to carry him. I've seen some people saying that he should just be cut at this point, but I ultimately don't see that. But I could see it happening maybe at some point this season or just going forward. I think the Falcons have to be thinking twice about how long-term of a piece is he, like talking about throughout the rest of his rookie contract, because he's small, which puts him at a disadvantage. And he's not a thumper. He's not like, knocking guys back when he hits them, considering his lack of measurables. And he's also not particularly quick at all. In fact, it always feels like he's a step slow to plays that need to be made. And then that kind of exposes the rest of the defense when he's not there to make a play. So it's been concerning to see what they've seen, but I know the team is really, really high on the professionalism aspect to JD Bertrand, just in how he prepares and all that. And I know that fans will poo-poo that completely, but and I'm not saying that it's necessarily valid like reason for keeping him or expecting him to necessarily improve his game, but I think that's what gives the team at least some confidence. And I think the team feels comfortable with him playing on special teams and things like that. So anyway, it has not been good. I'm sure the team is not enthused with what they've seen from him, but I do expect him to continue to make the team going into through this week through cuts. And Josh Woods, I think, will basically be that player who essentially replaces Troy Anderson. Again, another good, solid special teams player. And interesting that the team cut Caleb Johnson, he was an offseason signing. But they kept Ronnie Harrison Jr., a player who is intriguing because they signed him during training camp, and he is a safety. He was listed as a safety when he signed by the communications, but he's been practicing as a linebacker. And I think that he's one of those kind of in the Divine Diablo mold as a converted safety himself. And we've seen Jeff Ulbrich, the defensive coordinator, have some success with converted safeties in the past. I think Ronnie Harrison is a project they're going to want to continue with, but I don't think he'll make the roster. And at corner, again, we had 7. This should say 6. AJ Terrell, Mike Hughes, D. Alford, Natron Brooks, Billy Bowman, and CJ Henderson. The reason it's not 7 is I had it at 7, then I cut Mike Ford. I just couldn't justify carrying 6 corners. And if you're only carrying 6 corners, I couldn't justify keeping Mike Ford. And I know why, like they have Mike Ford around, and that's like to be that special teams player. But I just feel that's just not enough for me. Like I feel like there's other players. We've said special teams player about a lot of guys, and again, I think Mike Ford's a player who could be a practice squad target and elevated and playing on that in that first game of the season. But what exactly is Mike Ford doing so much better that you don't get on special teams that you can't get out of a Natron Brooks or a D. Alford? I'm just not sold that he's that much better than all these other players. So let's see. We'll see. I'm probably going to be wrong on this, and they are going to keep Mike Ford around, but we'll see. AJ Terrell, Mike Hughes, D. Alford, Natron Brooks, Billy Bowman Jr., and CJ Henderson. I have making the team. CJ Henderson, obviously a late training camp signing, but I think he's shown really well. Had an interception in one of his first practices, maybe his first practice. No, I think it was his second practice that he had. Intercepted Michael Penix. And is generally that bigger bodied corner that I think they've been looking for. I think they wanted Lamar Jackson to be that guy, but just after a strong start to camp, really tailed off pretty rapidly to the point where he got cut after this Cowboys game. And I think CJ Henderson kind of fits in nicely with this team. Has some good NFL experience, and I think is a quality addition, frankly, to this cornerback room. I think he's an upgrade. And then in contention, I think Kobe Bryant is obviously going to be a practice squad target. Clark Phillips, I still have on the outside looking in. Again, tough to tell because we just haven't seen much of him in preseason because he's missed time with the rib injury. Having said that, when I have seen him play, he commits a lot of pass interferences, and they have referees on the field refereeing these games, and I've seen multiple flags on Clark Phillips. Although that hasn't manifested as much in the NFL games that he's played in as from my recollection. So credit to him there, but just haven't seen enough of him in this preseason, mainly due to injury, to justify a spot on this cornerback list for him out, over these other players. And then Keith Taylor and Mike Ford, as we talked about. Let's move on to safeties, where it's maybe the most clear-cut room in the team outside of the quarterbacks, which is Jesse Bates, Jordan Fuller, Xavier Watts, and DeMarco Hellams. As for who starts, I think it's pretty 50-50 right now between Fuller and Watts. I would kind of lean towards Fuller if I'm to just predict, because I would think that the team would just be more confident in an NFL vet, especially against, wily quarterback like Baker Mayfield in week 1. But we'll see. It just feels like Xavier Watts is a little slow to react, a little slow to break on some things, still trying to not necessarily get caught up with like the speed of the game, but like kind of what he's supposed to be doing within the confines of the defensive scheme, just kind of still getting used to that. And DeMarco Hellams, I think, is a really good safety to have. And again, good special teams player. And interestingly, I thought Josh Thompson was having a better training camp than Henry Black, who again was signed after training camp started. But Henry Black is a familiar player to the Falcons, having participated in some of their training camps before, and he sticks around for now, though he's not going to make the roster. And on special teams, we obviously have Younghoe Koo, Briley Pinion, Liam McCullough, and Lenny Krieg will be waived, and I think the Falcons will hope to sign him on the practice squad. Here we have the on-the-bubble players and the priority signings, in my opinion, for the practice squad. Should have removed Josh Woods. We have him making it with Troy Anderson being on PUP. But you'll see some asterisks on some of these guys. Chris Blair, Carlos Washington Jr., Felipe Franks, D'Angelo Malone, Nate Carter. These are players who I think we should be looking for as players who could get cut, signed, and then could be playing on week 1. Mike Ford as well. Basically all these special teams guys. There's so many special teams guys, I feel like, on this roster that it's hard to justify or single out any of them at this point in time as being like, this is a guy who's going to be on the field on certain special teams. But I think any of them would be additions or the team would be comfortable with on special teams at any point. So Chris Blair, Jamal Agnew, probably should have put an asterisk by him as well. He could definitely be returning kicks. Kobe Bryant, LaCale London, D'Angelo Malone, Mike Ford, Jack Nelson, Carlos Washington Jr., Simeon Barrow Jr., Felipe Franks, Nick Nash, Nate Carter, and Lenny Krieg. Lenny Krieg would not count against the practice squad if he were to clear waivers. Falcons then have the priority to sign him back to their international developmental player, I believe is what it's called, IDP, I think, or something like that. And basically at that point, he cannot be poached. And then he's a Falcons player on their practice squad, and they could basically elevate him at any point. So anyway, that's what we have for the prediction show. Thank you guys for tuning into all of these over the course of training camp. Thank goodness the preseason is over. Training camp is over. We don't have to talk anymore about the debate about playing in preseason or whatnot. We will get that and that debate settled week 1 in less than 14 days at this point. 13 days, I guess, until the team kicks off against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where we will see whether the lack of preseason games helped or hurt, or, well, I guess we won't tell if it helped, but we'll be able to tell if it hurt this team. Thank you guys for joining us, and we will have a lot more coming to you later this week.